Our upcoming speaker punctuates a month where we've heard from Cal alums, we've heard from successful and serial entrepreneurs, we've heard from great storytellers, some passionate inventors, people driven to excel and distinguish themselves. Today's speaker is all of those things, plus she's a dedicated mother of 4, a gifted blogger, a former professor, although I did tell her I thought if you're a professor, you're always a professor, and research director. She's a MacArthur Genius Award recipient for her work in robotics and neuroscience. She continues that work with her organization Yoky Works, and she's our first CTO of the year. She became CTO of Nest in 2010 after co-founding Google X. If you haven't heard, Nest was sold to Google earlier this year for $3.2 billion. It is my great pleasure to welcome Nest CTO and all that, Yoky Matsuoka.
So thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here. You're right, I guess I was an undergrad here long time ago. So I've been on that side and then remember seeing people like me. I sometimes felt inspired and sometimes I felt sleepy. So hopefully today you'll feel a little more inspired than the sleepy, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about, sort of what I've watched from previous speakers as well as sort of learning what you guys are looking for in a series like this. I will talk about product side of things, but also talk about my life side of things. And, I would love to get as many questions, detailed, whatever your task, whatever it is that, question that you have, I would love to answer them. So I'll try to go through my talk relatively fast in the first 30 minutes or so and see where it goes. So I want to talk about Nest. Actually, how many people know Nest? Ooh, good class. So how many people own Nest? That's pretty hard to do with students, right? Yeah, okay, I get it. But you know what? Actually, this is one of the things we do. You can actually buy it, and then wherever you move, you can just put the old thermostat back in. When I was renting, that's what I did. Actually, I was renting when I first started at Nest, and I was hanging this giant PCB board on the wall. It got smaller and smaller and then smaller and then rounder. So so there are things that you can still do even as a renter. But before I tell you about Nest, where we sell these beautiful, intuitive product that really is about enriching your life, I want to sort of start with my life because turns out sort of it helps to explain why Nest product achieves certain things by knowing my background. So here you go. So and in my life, as I'm standing here, I can tell you it's a giant mess. I'm at the company all the time and dealing with all kinds of chaos. That's what happens when the company grows, and then now we have 800 people, and it's just, every day I say, Monday morning I show up and I get hit by a bus at work, and that's exactly how it feels like every week. And then Friday comes, and then I kind of unwind a little bit, and then Monday comes again, and I get hit by a bus. So that's half of my life. The other half of my life, I go home, and I open the door, and the dB level of all my 4 kids go, it's so loud. So it's sort of like a back and forth. So it's a giant mess. But even though it's a giant mess, I tried to make sense of it. I tried to see, what is my life? How do I actually look at it? And the way I look at my life is a book. So I put a picture, just the picture of the book. And I think they have lots of chapters. And the first chapter is actually written by parents. And then my first chapter was written by my parents. I was born in Japan. And my dad was sort of a wannabe entrepreneur who worked for a large company, never started his own company. And then my mom, being sort of a Japanese woman at that point, she went to college to find a mate and then found one and got married and then never had a job. And she sort of regretted that ever since. So that's kind of the atmosphere I grew up in, showing that I wore Japanese stuff too. So at some point, I started to break out of the mold and said, okay, still, lots of hand-holding from my parents. What do I want to be when I grow up? Then I finally found it, and then I said, it's going to be the title of my book, I'm going to be the best tennis player in the world. This is what I want to do. So I started spending all my time, really like 4 to 5 hours a day, for the school days, and then maybe like 7 to 8 hours on the weekend. That's all I did. That actually brought me to the US. So I played a lot of tennis. I went to Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy, for those people who know. I went to Wimbledon Junior, and that was really fun. But as I went on, this is a picture in the beginning of my college time, and if you look carefully, besides the fact that I have this evil face, I have these like wrapping things on my legs because I was so injured all the time. My body wasn't keeping up with this crazy schedule, so my ranking would go up, I get injured, push. My ranking would go up, I get injured, so it just eventually started to go down, and I realized that maybe the title of my book may not be the best tennis player in the world. Luckily, I was at Cal, and the greatest place to be for figuring out what to do with my life. And as I started to explore, I started to get quite interested in, actually, I'll show you. This is sort of the thought that I was going through. I'm like, okay, what should I do? And then, when you're a student, and then the next thing you're thinking about, you're probably thinking about this right now. It's like, whatever I'm going to pick next is going to define me. And that's exactly how I felt. And then I picked this major. Actually, here, of course, it's called EECS or EECS. And I thought, this is going to define me. This is it. This is me. I thought, well, if I'm going to do electrical engineering, I want to do something like this. I want to build a robotic device that could play tennis with me, because that's all I knew. I didn't really know anything else. I was pretty naive. So I thought, if I could build a tennis robot that had legs and arms and play tennis on the other side, that would be really awesome. Then on the day that I'm feeling great and I want to challenge, it would challenge me. But on the day that I wanted to beat out of me, then out of someone, then at least there's something that I could do that with. So that's really what I wanted to build. I approached a professor who's still here, actually, Professor Ron Fearing. And then I knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm interested in building a robotic buddy. He was quite happy to take me on. I worked with a grad student here building her legged robot. I went on even to MIT in grad school, continued to build. And then this is the robot that I built with a few other grad students. I built this time an arm and a legs, really trying to get to that robotic device. This robot was able to grab different objects in the lab by just simply starting with the reflex and really learn to adapt to grab different objects. That was great. But grabbing objects playing tennis is totally different, and I felt frustrated that we couldn't get there. So then I tried to figure out why I can't get there, and at that point, it really felt that the artificial intelligence, the AI, wasn't enough. But why isn't AI so bad, and why is our brain so good at picking up tennis? Even little kids can learn how to play tennis. So why don't we learn neuroscience? So I completely jumped in and changed my field about halfway through grad school into neuroscience. And by the end of my PhD, I was modeling human brain, doing computational neuroscience, and that's how my thesis looked like, even though my degree still said electrical engineering and computer science. Coming out of that, sort of my way of looking at life was a little bit different. By taking things like Neuroscience 101 type classes, I've been exposed to people who have neurological disorders, who are disabled for the rest of their lives. And I thought, I have robotic tools that I know how to do things with. Maybe I can actually help those people by understanding both robotics and neuroscience. So instead of putting this tennis buddy, I put that on hold, and I started actually trying to push the envelope of this field of what I call neuro-robotics, really the fusion of neuroscience and robotics. And that field was just starting. So I realized that it's not ready to start building robots for people today, but I can become a professor who does that. Oh, that's it. That's going to be my who I am, professor in combined neuroscience and robotics. So I became a professor at Carnegie Mellon in the Robotics Institute, and I built robots like this. So this is a robot that's very much of an anatomically correct robotic hand. Really, the idea was that we wanted to understand not only the brain signal that controls this crazy dexterous motion, but also there are some biomechanical components. Sometimes it's even sort of the actual mechanism itself that allows us to come up with this dexterity. So in order to understand all of it, I wanted to build it all from scratch, take all this raw signal from the brain, and then figure out exactly what the essence is for those people who needed help either to enable their motion on their hand or to give them a robotic prosthetic device so that their brain signal can control this robotic device. One of the really interesting example was stroke rehabilitation. So actually, how many people had family members with stroke? Pretty decent amount, I would say 30% of the room. So stroke is like a heart attack in the brain. And when the artery gets clogged and a certain part of the brain stops receiving blood, basically that part almost stops working. And then if that part has a lot to do with movements, which is pretty common because of the way artery is routed, then you come out disabled or paralyzed, or at least for a while you can't make motion. But brain is amazing. It adapts over time. So with the right rehabilitation, they can gain movement again. Currently, there are about 1 billion people in the world who have physical and mental disabilities and require assistance. In the US alone, there are 50 million people costing $500 billion just assisting those people. So we thought, well, what's wrong with this system? Turns out this rehabilitation itself is not done quite right. It just, because of insurance, because of logistics, all kinds of reasons, it makes it so difficult for people to fully recover. And we said, interesting. Can a robotic device like this help them to recover better than the current system? We can do it cheaper. We can have it more accessible. And then we can actually have robot to communicate very closely with what humans are intending to do. So this guy on the right is a stroke patient or a grad student pretending to be one. And as he's grabbing onto the robot, now the robot can actually immediately start to understand what kind of neural state or physical state that he's in. And no wires attached to the brain or anything. But just the moment he was all onto it and start moving around, it says, he's moving better than yesterday, or he's not paying attention. He's really tired today. These muscles are not working as much as these other muscles. We don't need to wire anything. Those things, robots are really good at getting those information. So that's the collaboration that we started to achieve, and then trying to figure out what kind of learning environment we can build. But turns out it was almost like a little bit bigger than me. So I couldn't do it all. I had to build a center which had over 100 faculty and maybe over 300 students from, by then I was like the professor at University of Washington, my baby steps back to here, to start building a center here at MIT. Lots of places were collaborating together to make this dream happen. But this was really pushing on that scientific envelope, right? Like trying to see if we can help people who's going to lose the limb 30 years down the line. But I was getting this sort of hunger, just like you guys. You want to change the world in some way because you want to start a company that's going to maybe make a lot of money or affect a lot of people. I felt the same thing. And my first way of doing it was to start this nonprofit called the Yoky Works. This was really caused by the fact that being a professor, and then people start sending emails saying, hey, you're a professor in Neuro-robotics, and then my daughter just got in a car accident, and she's unable to move. Can you build something? And eventually, with so many of them coming in, I thought, you know what? There are some cases I absolutely should take and then see where it goes. If I can pick those cases cleverly and then make sure to build things that can be applied to more people, maybe there's some business case there, at least from a nonprofit kind of aspect. So this is actually still ongoing. There are a lot of projects around this. Maybe one, depending on time, maybe one project I can quickly tell you about. So one project is called Project Maria. It's really amazing. So there was a girl who was 7 years old at the time who approached us. Well, her parents did. And she had cerebral palsy, which made her to not be able to speak at all and then make sort of a control motion. She had sort of gross motion, and then it was very, very difficult for her to move. So if I say point here, she would spend a good minute kind of getting to that point and then pointing. So she was there with parents, and then we were talking for a little while. And then just like a typical bright 7-year-old girl, she got kind of bored of this parents' conversation with me. So the dad gave an iPhone. So, and then she was sitting in the back on a wheelchair and then looking at pictures. And I saw her do this. And I was like, wait, isn't she unable to move? This is crazy. She can actually, if she wants, if she's bored enough to do something else, she can flip pictures like this. So we totally changed course on what we were going to build for her. We said, you know what? We're going to take advantage of the fact that she has this motion and then build this wheelchair thing that she used to have for communication, which had just 4 corners: bathroom, paying, I feel pain, hungry, that kind of things. And then built them, and she only had basically 4 bits of information, or not even 4 bits, 4 different information that she could communicate. And we made those into almost like a little bumpy buttons that she can just swipe in and then run into. And first we mapped it onto exactly the same thing. I'm hungry, I need to go to the bathroom, I have a pain. Then eventually we started saying, you know what, we can do combinations. We can do bump, bump, that's letter A, bump, 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 that's letter B. So now we can start to give her vocabularies, right? Letters and vocabularies and all of that. And then that really allowed us to sort of move this project forward. So that's the kind of dream that Yoky Works tried to paint for individuals, and hopefully that keeps going. It's still going. So that got us inspired so much and said, next move, I'm going to be a successful entrepreneur. So writing on this stroke rehabilitation idea, one of the things that was really difficult for people was to get to the hospital, to get this rehabilitation, because they're usually elderly. They have to ask their kids and says, can you please give us a ride? And then kids will be like, oh man, I have like a date with this girl. I don't know if I can actually, take you. So those things are inhibiting them from getting better. So what if we built a smaller version of the robot that I showed you earlier, and then sat at home, and then she can just play this video game all day long, and then she can actually, while she's chasing a little hummingbird or something, she can actually start to move her arm accordingly and then get better at home. It can communicate, all those informations through internet with the therapists and the doctors, and then people can be monitoring remotely, real time or not. This was a great idea, but partly because I was not a very good entrepreneur yet, and partly because there was no infrastructure to put something like this in home yet, it didn't go very well. So I was kind of bummed, because I was going to be labeled as the failed person starting a company. And that's probably what many of you are also afraid of, like, oh, is this a good enough idea? Should I go for it? I felt the same, and I went for it, and I totally failed. So I felt miserable. But you know what? One of the things that really came out of it was this learning of the human and robot interaction. Turns out everything that I was trying to do from the robot, so the machine learning, and then combination with human learning, was trying to make the person who they want to be, like a single circle, using machine learning and a human learning combination. Interesting enough, stroke rehabilitation, if the robot did too much, people didn't recover very well. But if the robot didn't do enough, also people didn't recover so well either. So this combination, just a fine balance between them, is something that we really mastered. And it felt like we don't have to use it just for stroke rehabilitation, but for a lot of different things. So that brings me to actually back to Silicon Valley. Google X has called up, well, Google called at that point, and then recruited me to get Google X started. Sort of hard to say no to that. And then when you're an academic, you can take a year or so off and then explore something else or help that and then go back. So I thought this would be a great segue. Let's see what kind of things I can do with the knowledge that I have with this machine and human learning intersection. Well, while I was there, I ran into an old student of mine. His name is Matt Rogers, who's actually now becoming very famous as a young person, as a founder of Nest. He invited me to lunch, and then we talked, and then he was so excited about this thing called HVAC, this dusty, yucky box that sits on the wall and then connected to even dustier thing in a basement. And I thought, oh boy, this guy has gone haywire. But you know what? We talked more and more. And his partner, Tony Fadell, who's from Apple, and then as we met, I started to realize that they have this wonderful idea to get thermostat as an unloved product in people's home that they can get into to actually change people's life big time. So as we talked more and more, I also realized that, hey, this thing is absolutely something that Nest is needed to succeed. So I jumped, started a new chapter, took risks, big risks, and started with really, really big problems. And this is actually an important point. As I've always looked at, like stroke or whatever it might be, I always try to start with a big problem. What can I solve? Even if the company remains small, what are the big problems that we can really tackle? So here are 2 problems that we tackled from Nest. One is this energy problem. So at home, we all want to save energy, and we are pretty good at turning off lights most of the time. We definitely are pretty darn good at closing the fridge every time because our mom said that we can't absolutely leave the fridge open, right? So we kind of get good at this, but we're not as good at turning off heating and cooling. And for my case, if they left the fridge open, my kids, I would be really, really mad. But it's really hard for me to get really, really mad about the fact that they forgot to turn the air conditioner off as they left the house because I know it's hard. I know it's hard for them. So this was a great opportunity for technology to help them. Again, it's about achieving who they want to be. So if they want to save energy and they're not good at it, why shouldn't we build the technology to augment for that? And if that technology can do it right, meaning that turn off the air conditioner at the right timing without compromising on comfort, the opportunity for saving is about 20% of that. So that's pretty big. The other big problem that our Nest decided to tackle on was fire. So we were all afraid that our house would burn down one day. Actually, when I was living at Berkeley, well, this is going to tell the age, but anyway, the Berkeley fire thing happened. I was living on Grizzly Peak, and giant fire was coming, and then a giant portion of the campus was evacuated. And since then, I have this horrible fear that our house will burn down too. So, it's a very big problem. It costs a lot of money to all of us, insurance company, and then people do get injured. But one thing that's very interesting is this fact that 3 out of 5 of those deaths that happened, those homes didn't have smoke detectors, at least the working smoke detector attached to the ceilings. You probably have experience of neglecting those things, and because all kinds of reasons, right? You just don't like interacting with them. You don't know if it's even working or not, and then it beeps, and you remove it, and then here it is. You just don't have one. So it could happen to you. You could be one of those 3 of 5 instead of the other half. So we started with those problems. What we decided to do was to combine this Apple-like approach in building a beautiful device that people really want to buy, as well as inner geek inside, really stuffed together so that we can actually try to help people. And I'll show you a video really quick. This is going to show you that feel of merging those things together. You get the idea, right? It's really nice that if you have a beautiful home, it fits in your home. It's not this beige thing that you neglect. While it works with people, and then make sure that it turns up the temperature and then turns down the temperature in such a way that's comfortable, yet also saves energy. In order to do that, we actually we have a lot of features. We've been inventing, coming up with all kinds of different ways to make people comfortable as well as to save energy. And then one way to do it is what we call auto schedule. Simply, they don't have to ever program this thing. Actually, you guys can, I'm sure, program this thing. But usually, if you've ever tried to program a programmable thermostat, there's an up and down buttons, and then it says Monday. And then you want to set 6 o'clock to have the temperature just go to 70 degrees. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh no, I just passed 6 a.m. Right? So that's how you program those programmable thermostats. This thing, you don't have to enter anything. You just touch when you wake up to the temperature you like. When you leave, hopefully you remember to turn it down. And a few of those cycles, and then boom, it learns your pattern, and then it comes up with a schedule for you. And turns out people have pretty regular schedules, so that works most of the time. But also, many of you, of course, have the Wednesday night poker nights, right? So when you go to those things that is not necessarily a regular thing, then auto-way kicks in. So whenever it's like not following the schedule, we say, uh-oh, it seems a little bit different from the usual. Let's turn it down anyway, too. So those combination can save a lot of energy. And we also offer this thing called seasonal savings for those people who live in a certain utility and an opt-in can actually basically have almost like a stroke rehabilitation-like program for you, energy, or you haven't had stroke yet, most of you, so you can probably relate it more like a diet program. So you have to lose weight slowly, right? You can't just stop eating one day and then 3 days later you're a little bit less weight, but then 5 days later you probably have more weight. Just the same thing for energy usage. You got to kind of get used to it a little bit at a time, and then all kinds of science tells you how slowly you can need to do it to adapt to it. So we got a program like that too. In combination, we actually send everybody energy report, and then the most recent number that we send people was about 2.5 billion kilowatt hours of saving. It's an abstract number, but it is actually the same amount of energy to used in Hawaii, all Hawaiian islands for 11 days. So just having tons of Nest out there and having those programs working allows us to save a lot of energy, which is really tackling on the big problem I talked about. Now on to this next product. So this is the fire death problem I told you about. And this is the problem that you have. You've probably heard that at 3 a.m., right? This is absolutely terror, like at the worst time of the day, like when you just had a great party and then you're just half happy drunk and then just this thing goes. Oh my God, this is terrible. And then you don't even know which one it is. So you go to a certain part of the room in your PJ and then you're looking around until your next beep happens. And it's like a beep, and you're like, okay, this way. And it's like, which one is it? And then you sit there and wait. It's really a terrible experience. Also, when the fire alarm, and then when you find it, what you do in the middle of the night, right? You broomstick it down. Then when it's down, then you take the batteries out, and then you feel so much better, and then you put it down and go to sleep, and you say, I promise I'll change the battery tomorrow. Then years and years can go by. So I've done it before too. So that's sort of the big problem. Also, for those people who actually did maintain it, still it's a pain. Everybody hates this thing because when you're cooking, for your friends, and then this thing can go off suddenly, and who knows when it's going to stop. There's a button that's supposed to hush it. You're pushing on it, still doesn't even stop, right? So we came up with some ways to make this experience better. Remove the pain points.
Heads up, there's smoke in the living room. The alarm may sound.
Imagine if it told you that based on the science that we've done and the smoke profile going towards a dangerous direction, said, very gentle voice said, heads up. That's exactly what we do. Also, at the very end of the event, when the alarm has been going off maybe multiple times and the room looks smoky and you don't know when it's going to go off again,
smoke is clearing in the kitchen.
We can tell you that we don't plan to alarm for a while. And that's really nice too. We actually, internally, with the software, we run sensor just health check, almost like every 42 seconds or something. It's crazy. We're checking it constantly to make sure they're working. And usually, a lot of devices do that too, but you have no idea what's going on inside. Well, we'll let you know. At any point, you can look at the app and see if all the tests recently have all passed or not. So you can check on that. Also, we'll tell you if the battery is draining like 6 months in advance. So you can know those things on the app as well as on your ceilings. We came up with an idea to basically every night as you turn off the light, you can do this over and over if you want to too, but as you turn off the light and then you look back and the device will give you a green circle on the days that everything has been okay, batteries is okay and sensors are okay. But on the days that maybe battery's low or internet connection is bad or other things are happening, you'll get an orange glow. And then you can ask and then actually it will tell you what kind of things might be going wrong. Something that we do we have built devices that learn over time because, either we have machine learning working or because we get massive amount of data from consumers which allow us to do software updates. So in this case, it's a little washed out, but in this case, we learned that there are a lot of people who take this comfortable shower, open the door, and the steam escapes, and then the alarm goes off. And it's really annoying too. And then we start to look at the data differences on those. And then there's total difference between steam-caused false alarm and dangerous smoke signature. So we said, why don't we write a software to reject all of those, but make sure that those alarm. So that's exactly what we did. And then now we had a software update, and everybody has one of those. If you didn't opt out, I guess. So by building one product at a time that was unloved in your house to remove the pain points, we can start to do really fun things together now. So by having more smoke detectors in the house, the thermostat can know more about you, so therefore we can save even more energy. When the carbon monoxide alarm goes off because there's some gas leak or something is going on in your house, and if you have a gas furnace running heat, we will turn that off for you too. So there's this communication, which is really neat to do within Nest product. But we now also launched a product called the program called Works with Nest. We partner with a lot of different companies, and in a couple of examples here. So this is a program with Mercedes. If you own a Mercedes, you can actually tell it that I'm just about to come home, and then the thermostat side knows the weather, and then how leaky your house is, and what kind of temperature you prefer, and how many minutes it's going to take it to get your house in a shape, get to be just comfortable when you come home, and it starts just at the right time to get that going. No waste of time, no waste of energy, just at the right time. We also partner with Whirlpool, who has a washer, and you probably, I don't know, I probably win on this laundry actually amount. I have 4 kids and we're running laundry every single day. It's nuts. It's one of the things I didn't know it comes with kids, by the way. So whenever, I don't like the sound of this all day long. So what if whenever the device knew that we're out of the house, automatically starts drying or washing the clothes, and if it knew and it predicted when I usually get home, it can actually say it could be hours afterwards. Usually the clothes are cold and wrinkled up. Well, it can do the fluff cycle. And then just as I get home and open it, it's nice and warm, not too hot, not too cold, and then not wrinkled. So there are lots of interesting things that we can do. And really the key is about learning the environment, right? So if you live in a brick house and then that's nice and modern and sealed up versus a wooden house that, maybe next door with the same weather but very breezy, our learning pattern would be totally different inside. Also, depending on who you are, we react very different. I'm starting to talk like I'm a thermostat, but we react very differently. So for example, actually, I'll tell you about the field trial that we did before we even launched the product. So we thought, if you buy a Nest, you must want to save energy, right? Because that was our goal. That must be your goal too. So we imposed a certain kind of learning. It got installed, and as you touched a little bit, the temperature started to decay a little bit to temperatures that they didn't necessarily ask for. Boy, did people hate it. People said, this is not what I want. I don't want something that does something for me. It's kind of a very interesting learning from the, even moving forward, right? So people want to be in control. And sometimes they wanted to save energy but still be in control. Sometimes they just didn't care to save energy, and the reasons were different. So we said, okay. And we turned around really, really fast to come up with much more of a accommodating who they are and then letting them control a strategy. And then we launched, and it was a huge success. So if you're the type, again, if you want to save energy, great, we'll work with you. But if you want to be comfortable and then just want to have a pretty thing on a wall, we'll work with you too. So to me, that's a really interesting thing about smart homes, connected homes, Internet of Things, and a lot of you are probably thinking this is a hot next area to get in, and I absolutely agree, this is the next hot area too. But in order to do this, I sort of tried to think of what are the essences, since that we learned so far by doing this, especially from my point of view. And number one, maybe it's obvious, but sometimes we forget. We're all sort of, at least I'm definitely a geek where I'm like, cool technology, gotta be good for people. Well, first thing, it has to be something people want to buy, right? If they don't buy it, if millions of people didn't buy Nest, we wouldn't have this footprint to be able to do the kind of data learning to be able to keep building the product correctly. We can't have this infrastructure of devices to partner with different companies. So this is absolutely number one. We have to build a product that's maybe beautiful enough for people to want to buy it. It has to solve the pain points that everybody says, yeah, I've had that too, right? Those are incredibly important. Next thing is what I told you about being in control. people have to feel comfortable with those devices. So we have to absolutely let them be in control, not to do things that we think they want to do. And finally, it's all about understanding. So they need to understand that this is a collaboration program. So, if they want to save energy, they have to interact with the device in a certain way to save energy together. So this is really, again, remember the picture of the circle with yin yang. It's really about that relationship. And then user needs to know that too. And finally, really, it's about really earning your trust to be in their home and being able to live together. And, I often think about where we're going with all those products. And then, of course, we're thinking of all the other next steps from Nest 2. But personally, I would love to see this keep going in such a way that robots like this, which is not for everybody, but for people who want it and need it, can actually use it because the space is not ready for it. So coming back to the book. So this is my book. And one chapter that I actually forgot to tell you is I actually have a totally different chapter, so it seems like from the sequence of things, about sort of raising my 4 kids with my husband. And this turns out to be really, really hard, especially doing it along with all the other chapters. So this chapter affects every other chapter that I just talked about. But you know what? One of the things often this chapter ends up killing the career for a lot of people. But now that I've kind of bulldozed through and then got here, what I'm noticing is that this chapter is helping every other chapter as well. How? So these kids are kind of cute, turns out. When you have kids, I don't know, they come out adorable. So they came out kind of adorable too, at least to me. And so I want to see them as much as possible. And in order to see them as much as possible, whatever I do in other chapters better be worth it to be away from them somehow. So I absolutely make sure whatever I pick for my career or company or product that I build, it is amazing. It's going to change the world in some way that it's worth spending some time away. Also, when I'm away, I absolutely make sure that there's not a single minute that goes to waste. Because if I can be putzing around and doing something else, I could be with my kids too. So in those ways, it enriches everything. It just sort of squeezes everything in such a way that it really works. And another thing, as you're probably on fairly early chapters, but as I built those chapters and I thought every single chapter was going to be the title of my book, whatever the chapter you open and pick and then go for it, you gotta pick something that you feel so passionate that you feel like you can do this for the next 5 years. And then it's worth doing it even though you're gonna be away from kids, if you have kids. So that's sort of a very good way of thinking about it. But at the same time, you shouldn't be afraid of starting a new chapter. Sometimes it's like, oh boy, it's just too daunting, I can't possibly start. You saw it, there are a lot of chapters to come. I'm actually in my 40s, and you guys are probably in your teenager years. And there are a lot more chapters to come, turns out. And it's okay to have failed ones. You gotta try it to know. And turns out if you failed, it's okay. Those things, as you can see, sort of builds to the next thing. It makes you stronger. We even have terms that we use and says, oh, you're cool, you got scar tissues that's really helping you, right? Those are the terms. It really shows you that the more experience you get in positive and negative will make you even more successful in the future. So I'm closing now, but really this is gonna be your next chapter. It's kind of empty over here, and it's for you to decide what it's gonna go. And I'm going through the same process myself. And you definitely don't have a title of the book yet. So I hope you get to define this book title of yours over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll take questions.
Hi, great talk. Thanks for coming. I think that was really cool. What I'm really curious about were the early days at Nest. going back to when it was just like kind of maybe a little close to where we're at, where it's kind of more like you really uncertain, you don't really know what's going on, you're kind of like moving from idea to idea. Like, what was that like? What was the team like? What was the process? And how did that change over time?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. So we, before I joined Nest, I joined at the stage of when we were in a garage and there were single-digit people in the company, because if I was going to jump in, it had to be a really good one. And that's how you should do it too. And I poked holes from whichever direction possible and said, this is going to fail, right? You haven't thought about it, right? And then there is a great answer for everything. And so even as I joined, I felt like, okay, I can risk myself to a certain extent. So it could be a different circumstance for different people, but at least that's the shape that I joined Nest. Moving forward, of course, like the fundamental idea, like energy saving, thermostat, we're going to go in the house and it's going to have internet, it's going to have remote control, all those things are great. But details, as you say, have gone back and forth and it's like, oh no, we can't possibly do this. Just like what I said about this field trial, we were super confident the way we're going to save them energy was the way to go. Really, 2 months before we had a planned launch, we gave it to the field trial people because it takes time to build a field trial people, and then finally had it, and finally had a product that doesn't completely fall apart, and then gave it to people, and then people hated it. I mean, that's like, it felt like the world was coming to an end. And then it was, yeah. So, but it is okay. We found ways to turn around. I think one of the things that we did a really good job is we huddled at that point, not too many people, but key people, to really talk about what it meant. Be very honest to ourselves. Go back to really, what do we want if it was us? And then just listening to that carefully, and then eventually going with the gut, right? Going with the gut and just going for it. We launched, it was just like hearts pounding, like, are people gonna buy it? Are people gonna like it? It worked out really well for us. But that was definitely an interesting process through there.
Great, so my question is about, does it work? Yeah? Mm-hmm. So my question is about about the screen. So why did you decide not to do a touchable screen? Like if you look at the competitors, like I've worked with one of the competitors, and we actually did a touchable screen, and we don't understand why you guys didn't go that way. And my second question is about in Europe. Why did you decide not to go to market or to launch the product in Europe fast, or to try to beat competitors or something?
Okay, both are good and hard questions. So. Touch screens is more of a product decisions of how we wanted it to appear, what kind of interaction we wanted it to be. We decided pretty early on that we loved the idea of push and click. Push and then turn. So that was very simple. And any moment that we gave a touch screen, we realized that the interface is going to be more complicated. So I understand that more and more devices have touch screens, and that's sort of our inclination. A lot of people go to Nest and touch it, and then nothing happens, right? So I understand, when people look at things, and then that's sort of now starting to be our way of interaction. But that was sort of a conscious decision early on that we wanted to be even simpler than that. So that's one. And then Europe. So Europe, now we are in 7 countries, I think. Decision to not go in early, boy, that's a really good question and a difficult one. As a startup, in many ways, not going out crazy, all sort of spreading thing and then going to a lot of places is a good idea. That's one. 2, for this space, the HVAC, heating, cooling space, every country has different system to connect to. So we couldn't just be like an app that everybody carries an iPhone that if I built it and then as long as I translate it, it can be used by anybody. It wasn't quite that. Also, how people interact. For example, first European country we went into was the UK. UK people, rather than making their room comfortable, they go to the closet and put a sweater on. So we needed to understand that people are different too, and then we needed to make sure those things work as well. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question about acceptance, especially for the smoke detector, because Whereas for controlling the temperature is something positive, something that you like to. If you buy a smoke detector, it's like buying an insurance. It's recognizing the fact that you are exposed to a risk that you don't want to see happen. And psychologically, it's something that people do not like to. It's a necessary pain. I don't know about the American regulation about smoke detectors, but how do you tackle that necessary pain in selling smoke detectors?
So it's a very good question, but actually one of the holes that I tried to poke on the first day at Nest sort of question was, I don't love thermostat. As a matter of fact, thermostats, I hate it, right? So even thermostats, from my point of view, this yucky thing that primarily just cost a lot of money. So turning what we call unloved product to something that people start tweeting after we start selling, it's like, I love my thermostat, it's so cool. And in that sort of transformation, we saw it going in. So this doubt that we had of how could something that people don't like to become some loved product. So it was a challenge. As you say, it has regulations and all kinds of different things. It's a completely different challenge. But same thing, we saw a huge opportunity, primarily from saving lives, but also from converting hated product into something that they can live with together and then work together to achieve something. So yeah, I think we are, and again, same thing, just that people went from like, yeah, I can relate to those pain points to like, oh, thank you for solving those. So it's really not too different from thermostats.
Hello. It's here? Yeah. You mentioned how the positive impact of data from thermostats and the Nest Protect on your product. But especially now that you're owned by Google, I can see there being privacy concerns. What is like your company's policy on, I don't know, if the federal government or an advertiser wanted to know when I'm in my house, like what is Nest's policy on data?
Okay, so I will tell you from the privacy point of view that, so as you know, when we're an independent company, it was certainly easier, but we were crazy careful about data to the point that it was almost inhibiting the science portion in many ways too. So we strip any personal data. We don't look at independent data. We look at things in the aggregate, you know, and then so that's sort of already not able to even we can look at who it is. They can, you know, the customer can basically give permission through customer service and saying, I'm having issues. I give you permission to look my specific information. And of course, we can look at that. But that's about it. So we were very careful going in. With Google, you know, we got all the press and it's like, oh no, you know, I think some newspaper even published like a thermostat running an ad or something on a, you know. So sure, totally understand the fear. Google's a great company, but it also has this fear component to it. We can talk about, you know, acquisition part coming up too, but we actually did a really good acquisition merging thing together. We retained a lot of independence as Nest. We kept our own brand and we kept our own privacy policy. And we have a firewall between Google and us. So Google can't possibly come in and do stuff to our data, and we're gonna absolutely keep it that way.
I wanted to thank you for coming here. That was an excellent talk. I wanted to ask, and I apologize in advance, this might be a bit of a long question, but you mentioned when you began raising a family, you had to really make sure that what you were doing was important. And being a Cal student, there are a lot of opportunities thrown at us, and oftentimes the most difficult decision is deciding which ones to turn down.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you have a personal, either a litmus test or I imagine the question boils down to how do you know what you're choosing to do is really meaningful, not only to yourself, but to the world, to society? What kind of internal test do you have, both personally and business-wise?
Yeah, it's a very big question. Thank you for asking that. I can tell you how I do it. I don't necessarily recommend that this is the way to go, but I eventually get to a point, whatever the choice is, right? So whether it's going to grad school, joining this amazing company that pays crazy amount of money, starting this startup and risking, but if I succeed, I can be Mark Zuckerberg, kind of like all these options. And then when I really can decide, Well, first, you know this trick probably. You flip a coin, right? And then you say heads, and then heads this and then tail this. And if in your side it says, I hope it's head, I hope it's head, and you kind of know, right? That's sort of a trick, but no, that's not really. So, but then the other thing that I really do is that I actually sort of step out of my body for a second and make rows of things that are important to me. Where I live, how big my house is, how often can I play tennis, right? Whatever it might be, just make a long row of it. Then all the options in here. Then I put scale of 1 to 10 on each of those. So analytical sometimes. And then I tally them up, and I look at the number, and then see if I actually really believe. Sometimes I put weights on different ones, right? So, well, weather's not as important as the size of the house, or whatever it might be. So then after that, you come up with a number, and then you look at it, and then you kind of start to feel good because you did the sort of the rational bit of really writing that down and putting numbers to it, but also sort of looking at the number and then irrational bit, this is deciding, does this feel right to me? Does my gut agree with it? Then when you're ready, just step on the gas and go.
Is this on? Yeah, just going off the topic of Google's acquisition, I know the rationale for Google was to get into the hardware business as well as the Internet of Things. Mm-hmm. And on the Nest side, the benefit was that the CEO would have to focus less on infrastructure as well as managing the business and focus more on the product. I just wanted to know what are some of the limitations that came about by being under the Google umbrella. I know there are a lot of benefits, but there are also benefits from being just an independent company. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on some of the limitations and the hardships.
Okay. I think you've been reading up on us. It's really amazing to know all that, so thank you. So you're right. So that's sort of the what's in the newspaper part. And I'm going to brag one more time for a second, and then I'll maybe try to find flaws. But this, I now do a lot of acquisitions I help acquisition with Google as well as Nest, and I see what happens afterward, before and then during and then after the acquisitions. And many of those are not that great. They get rich in some way, but sort of often it's basically absorption of the dream, the freedom that you had, right? So that's sort of the perception, and then that's probably why you're asking this question too. But somehow we struck a really good deal. We really retained independence. Maybe something you can relate to would be like a YouTube model. YouTube is known as YouTube. Some people don't even know that Google owns YouTube. That level of autonomy, the brand name, we got to keep all of that. In terms of the roadmap and all of that, we also have 100% control of. We consult and say, hey, what do you think? And Larry's amazing, just basically says, go for it. You guys have been amazing. That's why we're together. Just do the thing that you've been doing. So that's absolutely amazing. And free food and stuff's really good too. Let's see. Another good thing was that from somebody like me, technology part, is that Google has been developing all kinds of nuggets of technology that's applicable for Nest. The Nest didn't have the capability to have. So it's like a candy store, and then we can actually really collaborate. So that's great. So what's the pain points or whatever that came with it? Let's see. Oh, another thing. Good thing, sorry. So Google makes so much money that Nest profit is like, pennies to them, right? So from their point of view, they basically are really saying like, go full on, get footprints, get as many people to buy this thing. This is the first point, right? People have to love it and buy it for us to be able to do a lot of fun things. So so smoke detector went from $129 to $99. Probably would have been much, much harder to do as a startup too. So those are really good. So what's hard right now? First, a joke. I'm going through a review cycle, and I have a pretty big team, and then I have to write a lot of reviews, which Nest just didn't have to do. We were a startup. So that's sort of a pain. But in reality, maybe one of the things is, as we merged, it's not as simple as saying candy store. Give it to me, I'll take it. But because we're doing carefully about the privacy side, we can't just say, oh, candy, I want to use this technology and then start sending our data over to their stuff, right? So, and then they have their proprietary information. They can't just give it to us and then run it on our side too. So that logistics turns out to be, is totally solvable in many ways, but it's not as easy as I hoped for. But besides that, it's been quite amazing. Really hard to find bad things about it right now.
Hi. You said that people hated the first few designs you had come up with, and then after the field trials, you changed a few things. So what were those few things? That's question number one. And question number two is, did you always have the smoke detector at the back of your mind or was it something which you thought about once Nest, the thermostat, was a hit? Or did you always envisage the two things going hand in hand and just released it one after the other, or was it more ad hoc?
Okay, got it. So first question first. What did we change in the last 2 months after the field trial? So we, it's kind of interesting. This is a very thermostat specific answer. But one of the things that I've learned is that people actually remember the temperature they set. If you set the room to 71 degrees, when they come back, they expect that they see 71 degrees. It's really amazing. So if we play with it a little bit and make it to 70 degrees, they said, aha, you touched it. So we actually decided to absolutely only show the numbers. Actually, we don't like temperature either. Absolutely show and respect the temperature number that they asked us to heat or cool the house to. So I think that was an absolute thing that we listened to, and then people seem to really like it. Also, another thing is that, again, we listen from machine learning's point of view. We try to understand if they are energy savings kind of people or non-energy savings kind of people, and then make sure that it's not a uniform kind of saving program. So those two things we did. Next question was about whether we've always had idea to do smoke detector right after thermostat, right? No, we didn't. So we, I think as you start a company, the right thing to do, you can have this giant dream, but when you're pitching for Series A, when you're getting seed fundings, it gotta be chewable chunk, right? It has to be a really nice, solid story that people can poke in and just can't poke any hole at, but self-contained. And that's how we remained for a long time. While we're shipping the first product for, again, sure, we talked like, is there a next thing? If we're successful, but stayed focused. Every funding, every external point of view, we stayed very, very focused.
I don't know what your timing is, but I don't know if you're still doing this also, but my understanding is that Yoky gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning, so she can usually be home at 3 in the afternoon. And since it's much later than that, I thank you for all of your time. It's been great. Do you need to go? Can you take one-off questions afterwards?
I'm happy to take more questions.
Fantastic. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, come on up to the stage.